I never thought my marriage would come to this. Empty silences, cold dinners, and nights spent staring at the ceiling while my husband snored beside me. For years, I told myself it was just a phase, that his long hours at work, his distracted eyes, and his dwindling affection were only temporary. But the truth weighed on me like a stone. I was lonely, desperately lonely. It was during one of those hollow evenings that I found myself at my best friend Melissa's house. We had been inseparable since college, and her husband, Daniel, had always been just Melissa's guy to me, charming, steady, the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday and always asked if you needed help carrying groceries. That night, Melissa was running late from work, and Daniel was the one who opened the door. He smiled warmly, inviting me in. "You look like you could use a glass of wine," he said casually. I laughed it off, but when he poured me a drink and we sat in the living room waiting for Melissa, I felt something strange, a comfort I hadn't felt in years. We talked about work, life, and how busy everything seemed. I didn't mean to, but words slipped out that I had been holding inside for too long. "I don't even recognize my husband anymore," I admitted softly, swirling the wine in my glass. "It feels like I'm invisible to him." Daniel didn't look away, didn't brush it off the way most people would. Instead, his gaze softened, his voice low and sincere. "You're not invisible, Linda. Anyone would be lucky to have your attention." My breath caught for a moment. It wasn't flirtation, at least not yet. It was empathy, the kind I hadn't heard in so long that it felt foreign. But it also felt dangerously good. When Melissa arrived, I tucked the moment away like a guilty secret. Yet, something in me stirred. For the first time in years, I felt seen. And that was the beginning. The weeks that followed blurred together, but one detail stood out. I started seeing Daniel more often than I ever expected. At first, it was innocent. Melissa would invite me over for dinner, and we'd all sit around the table, laughing and sharing stories like we had for years. But sometimes, Melissa worked late, and I'd find myself alone with Daniel again. It was in those quiet hours that I began to open up more. He had this way of listening, really listening, like every word I said mattered. My husband used to be that way years ago when we first fell in love. But now, Daniel filled that void. One evening, Melissa was stuck in traffic, and Daniel and I sat on the back porch as the sun went down. He handed me a blanket when the air turned cool, his fingers brushing mine just briefly, but enough to send a current through me. "You deserve to be happy, Linda," he said suddenly, his voice firm but kind. I looked at him, startled. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, searching my eyes. "I mean, you shouldn't have to carry so much alone. You're strong, but even strong people need someone." Something inside me cracked. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was the loneliness, but I whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I made a mistake. If marrying him was the wrong choice." Daniel didn't rush to fill the silence. He just let it sit there between us, heavy and raw. Then, he placed his hand gently on mine. "Don't say that to punish yourself. You're human, Linda. You just want love. There's nothing wrong with that." The warmth of his hand lingered long after he pulled away. That night, when I lay in bed beside my husband, his back turned to me, his breathing deep and even, I felt haunted by Daniel's words. I closed my eyes, imagining his hand still resting on mine, his voice reminding me that I deserved more. It was dangerous, I knew, but the seed had already been planted. It happened on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Melissa had called me earlier, asking if I could stop by to help her organize some things for a charity event. When I arrived, though, Daniel answered the door with an apologetic smile. Melissa had to run an errand for the fundraiser. "She'll be back soon," he explained. I hesitated for a moment, but he waved me in. "You might as well stay. No sense driving all the way back in this weather." The storm outside rattled the windows as we sat together in the living room. The air smelled of coffee and rain-soaked earth, and for a while, we talked about nothing, little stories, work gossip, even old college memories of Melissa. But the more I spoke, the more his eyes seemed to hold me in place, as if he was memorizing every flicker of my expression. At one point, I laughed too hard at something he said, and my hand instinctively reached for his knee. Just a friendly gesture, I told myself. But when I realized where my hand rested, I froze. He didn't move. He didn't flinch. His gaze locked onto mine, and suddenly the silence between us wasn't friendly anymore. It was charged, electric. I pulled my hand back quickly, heat rushing to my cheeks. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "Don't," he interrupted softly, his voice low. "You don't have to apologize." My heart pounded. I could feel the storm outside echoing inside me, loud and restless. The house was too quiet, too intimate. My thoughts raced, telling me to stand up, to leave before I crossed a line I could never uncross. But then his hand reached for mine, slowly, deliberately. His fingers brushed against my skin, and in that moment, I didn't pull away. The touch was small, simple, yet it felt like everything. My breath caught as he leaned just slightly closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Linda, I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I can't pretend I don't notice what's between us." I swallowed hard, my heart thundering in my chest. "You shouldn't say that," I whispered back, though the words were trembling, unconvincing. "Maybe I shouldn't," he admitted, squeezing my hand gently. "But I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about you." The air was heavy with things unspoken, things we both wanted but knew we shouldn't. And yet, as I sat there with his hand in mine, I realized I didn't want to let go. For the first time in years, I felt alive. The storm outside deepened, the rain pounding harder against the windows, as though nature itself mirrored the chaos inside me. My hand still rested in Daniel's, warm and steady, while my thoughts screamed at me to pull away. But I didn't. He leaned closer, slowly, cautiously, giving me every chance to stop him. His breath brushed my cheek, and my heart hammered in my chest. I could smell the faint trace of his cologne, something musky and warm that wrapped around me like a dangerous spell. "Linda," he whispered, his voice full of restraint and longing. I should have stood up. I should have reminded myself who he was, my best friend's husband. But instead, I tilted my face toward him. Our lips met, soft at first, tentative, as if we were testing the line we both knew we had already crossed. The kiss deepened, growing urgent, hungry, years of loneliness and unspoken desire pouring into that single moment. My fingers gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, while his hands cradled my face as though I was something precious. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, the silence was deafening. "This is wrong," I whispered, though my voice betrayed me with its trembling need. "I know," he admitted, his forehead resting against mine. "But tell me you didn't feel it too." I closed my eyes because the truth was unbearable. I had felt it. Every part of me had come alive in his arms. Melissa came home not long after, the sound of her keys jangling and the lock jolting us back to reality. We leapt apart, guilt flooding the space between us. By the time she walked in, we were sitting on opposite couches, pretending nothing had happened. But everything had changed. That night, as I lay in bed beside my husband, his body turned away from me as always, I touched my lips, still tingling from Daniel's kiss. Shame burned inside me, but so did something else, longing, need, the cruel reminder of what I had been missing all these years. In the days that followed, Daniel and I avoided each other, careful not to let our gazes linger too long whenever we were in the same room. But the memory of that kiss lingered between us, like an unspoken confession. Melissa remained blissfully unaware, her laughter bright, her trust in me unshaken. Every time she hugged me or told me how grateful she was for my friendship, guilt twisted inside me like a knife. I told myself I would never let it happen again, that I would bury the memory of his lips on mine deep inside, lock it away where it could never escape. But the truth was cruel. Once you've been touched like that, seen, wanted, cherished, it never really leaves you. Months later, my marriage was still the same, empty, distant, hollow. My husband remained oblivious, caught up in his work, while I carried a secret that gnawed at me every day. I never kissed Daniel again. We kept our distance, both of us too aware of the line we had already crossed. But every time I saw him, Every time his eyes met mine across a crowded room, or his voice lingered on my name, I remembered. And sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet and I was left alone with my thoughts, I pressed my fingers to my lips and whispered into the darkness. I still feel you. The betrayal may never be spoken aloud, but it lived inside me, a fire I could never truly extinguish.